So seeing as how everyone is having high hopes for a Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake ever since the HD remaster was announced, I decided that now would be a good time to kind of share some thoughts and ideas of what I'd like to see in those remakes in order to, in order for them to be different enough from the original, but still also be as good, if not better, than the originals. So I think one thing that Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes would really benefit from is if they borrowed heavily from Resident Evil Remake in terms of how it plays and a lot of the features that it had going for it. One thing I'd like to see return from Resident Evil Remake into Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes are the Crimson Heads. They brought a new type of challenge to the game, and it always made you think of, should you kill the zombies or should you just avoid fighting them altogether? And I think that would really work for Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, considering how much you backtrack within the police station, and with Resident Evil 3 you backtrack like within the police station, outside in the city, in the hospital, and various other areas. So I think Crimson Heads would really work if the player is just careless and just gunning down all these zombies. Now, one thing that Operation Raccoon City did right was bring back Crimson Heads, but they didn't expand on what other monsters could become Crimson Heads. And in a file in Resident Evil Remake, it goes over how zombies become Crimson Heads and how they're not sure if other things can become Crimson Heads as well. They just know that regular zombies, after you've killed them and you didn't burn them or blow up their head, they just become Crimson Heads. So I think that with a Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, they should maybe have some Crimson Head-esque type monsters like lickers or dogs, or maybe like the plants, and various other monsters like the insects, for example. So things like that, if they can do something like that with those enemy types and just expand on what else can become like a Crimson Head-esque type monster, I think that would make the game different enough from the original version, and also different enough from Resident Evil Remake to make it feel fresh and not just a copy and paste of Remake. Now, one thing I know may or may not be an issue for fans of the series is the camera angle. Some people prefer the old school fixed camera angle, and other people like the third person over the shoulder type camera. And personally, I think they should just add in both. I mean, there's a fan remake of Resident Evil 2 out there. I believe it's an alpha or beta, I'm not too sure, but I'll leave a link down in the description below if you guys are interested. But in that fan-made remake for Resident Evil 2, you can play in a fixed camera angle or the third person over the shoulder camera angle. So I think they should just add in both for whichever you prefer, or whatever fans prefer. So like, if you prefer that, then go for that. If you prefer the old school, go for the old school. If you prefer the newer stuff, then go for the newer stuff. So I think if they do it like that, it can work. The only thing that might be a problem is that they're gonna have, if you're going with the old school stuff, you probably couldn't dodge or something like that like you would with some of the newer stuff. But I think that would make the game a lot more challenging if you couldn't dodge anyway. So let me guys know what you think about that, if they should just add in both or just stick to one, if they were to remake these games. So I think with Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, they should probably do the same thing that Resident Evil Remake did, and add in some new locations to the old map, and maybe some new rooms, maybe even redesign some rooms to make them bigger or a lot more smaller to make it feel a lot more like claustrophobic. I think that would really work for like the police station and the hospital and various other locations within Raccoon City if they were to do a Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake. So Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes would more than likely get rid of those old school modes, extra modes that they had, which was Extreme Battle Mode in Resident Evil 2 and the old school style of mercenaries in Resident Evil 3, where instead of trying to get a body count and all these combos and whatnot, you have to get from point A to point B while saving civilians and trying to keep the time up so that way you didn't die. If they were to keep those modes in, I would prefer that, but if they didn't, more than likely they would replace those with the new style of mercenaries. But if they were going to replace it with something else, an entire new mode or something we've already played, I would really like to see raid mode get put into those two games, because I really do enjoy raid mode in Revelations. It's very challenging. You get different enemy types. Some are more defensive, others are more offensive. Some are really fast, others are really slow. Some have all of the abilities put into one. And I think that would really work for Resident Evil 2 and 3 remake, if assuming that they're not going with a fixed camera style. I don't know how that would play with a fixed camera style, to be honest with you. And lastly, Fourth Survivor and Tofu modes should be unlockable in this remake for Resident Evil 2. I'll get to Resident Evil 3 in a little bit, but for Resident Evil 2, they should be unlocks, not locked on the disc and later to be sold as DLC. Now, Resident Evil 3 doesn't have like a Fourth Survivor type of mode, but I think what they could do is add in an extra like story mode based on maybe Nikolai's perspective and how he's involved. Of course, you find out how he's involved through Jill's story, but maybe you can see his perspective, and maybe in his perspective you can see like new enemy types that aren't in Jill's story, along with maybe some new weapons and various other things that they could add into that story mode. So those are all the things that I'd like to see in Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes. If there's anything that I didn't say that you guys would like to see in these remakes, then by all means just let me know down in the comments below. And if there's anything that you just don't want to see happen in these remakes, again, down in the comments below. And I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks.